Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a real puzzle at the heart of the Indian economy. You see, on one hand, you hear about growth slowing down, but on the other, corporate profits are apparently off the charts. So what is really going on? Let's get into it. This is the big question, right? How can both of these things be happening at the same time? It seems like a total contradiction. But, this paradox actually tells us a lot about what's happening with corporate strategy and even national policy in India right now. Okay, so to crack this puzzle, you have to look at two totally different numbers. First, you've got core earnings. That's the money companies make from their actual day-to-day business. And that's actually shrinking. But then there's the headline number, net profit, and that's soaring. So what's the difference? Well, it's these massive one-time gains from giants like Reliance Industries and HDFC Bank selling off big assets. It's creating this illusion of fantastic growth, but it's masking a much weaker reality underneath. So that kind of explains the weird profit numbers. But this isn't all just happening on its own. Behind the scenes, the government is getting ready to make some really big moves that could honestly reshape the entire economic landscape. And this is a huge one. We're talking about a complete revamp of both the goods and services tax, the GST, and the direct tax system. This isn't just some minor adjustment, it's a fundamental overhaul of how money and goods move through the Indian economy. So what would this new GST system actually look like? Well, it seems to come down to three main things. First, they want to simplify the super complicated input tax credit system. Second, they're looking to switch to a much cleaner two-tier structure, maybe with just a 5% and an 18% tax slab. And third, and this is a big one, they plan to keep fuel out of the GST system, at least for now. So, why should you care about all this tax talk? Well, look at this. If the GST on things like TVs and air conditioners gets cut from that high 28% rate down to 18%, we could see prices drop by around 10%. That's a serious saving for you and me. The only catch? People might just decide to wait for those price cuts before they buy anything, which could slow things down in the short term. Of course, what happens inside a country is only half the story. No economy exists in a bubble. A lot of India's big decisions are being driven by major pressures from around the world, forcing the country to rethink its strategies on everything from trade to energy. And here's a perfect example of those global pressures. For a while, it looks like India and the US were getting close to an interim trade deal. But now, everything's on hold. And the reason why is pure geopolitics. To really get why things are stalled, you need to understand this term, secondary tariffs. Basically, this is when one country, like the US, threatens to penalize another country for trading with a third nation that's under sanctions. In this case, it's all about the US putting pressure on countries that are buying Russian oil. And that threat is what's put the freeze on those trade talks with India. And this really puts India in a tricky situation. As you can see, alongside China and Turkey, India has become one of the biggest buyers of Russian crude oil, mainly because it's been getting it at a steep discount. So now the country has to do this really difficult balancing act between its own energy needs and its critical international relationships. But here's the economic twist. India isn't the only one lining up for these deals. China, which has a long history of buying sanctioned oil, is now buying even more from Russia. And all that extra competition could start to chip away at the very discounts that made Russian oil so appealing to India in the first place. All right, so despite all those global challenges, there are some parts of the Indian economy that are absolutely on fire right now. We're seeing these new growth engines revving up, especially in high-tech manufacturing, like electronics and electric vehicles. I mean, just look at this. That Made in India tag is now showing up on some of the world's hottest tech. Foxconn is already doing small-scale production for the iPhone 17 in Bengaluru, and Samsung is now making its laptops right there in Greater Noida. This is a massive, massive shift. And it doesn't stop with phones and laptops. The electric vehicle market is about to go into overdrive. The upcoming festival season is going to be huge. We're expecting debuts from Tesla's Model Y, plus new EVs from Hyundai, Tata, Maruti Suzuki, and even the Vietnamese automaker VinFast. The roads are about to look very different. But hold on, it's not all a smooth ride. The opportunity here is obviously massive. People are hungry for these new cars, but the challenges are just as real. Things like getting a reliable supply of raw materials, and maybe the biggest one, building out enough charging stations across the country. Those are the real hurdles that could slow this whole thing down. And all this ambition isn't just about making things inside India. Take a look at this quote from Make My Trip. The country's biggest online travel company is making a huge push into corporate travel and expanding into new global markets like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It's a great example of Indian companies thinking bigger. All this rapid change, this corporate ambition, it's not just about what companies are making or where they're selling. It's forcing a deep rethink about the very principles of how they operate and what it even means to work for them. So you're seeing one clear philosophy emerge. It's perfectly summed up here by the head of Amazon India. The game plan is simple. Be obsessed with the customer and make sure you follow all the local laws. It's a very public-facing, customer is king approach. But then there's this other competing idea. While some companies are focused outward on the customer, others, like IBM, are focused on a critical internal battle: data. Who controls it? Where is it stored? As this quote says, it's become a fundamental question not just for companies, but for governments and for all of us as individuals. And you could have the best strategy in the world, whether it's customer first or data control, but none of it matters if your internal culture is broken. A recent study from IIM Lucknow really hammered this point home. It found that toxic stuff like workplace bullying can completely kill the creativity and innovation that these companies desperately need to survive and grow. So, that brings us to the final question. When you look at everything we've talked about, it feels like India is at a real turning point. So what's going to drive its next big chapter? Will it be top-down government policy, like those huge tax overhauls? Or will it be the bottom-up, scrappy innovation that we're seeing in its factories and startups? That right there is the real puzzle to watch.